Hi guys, welcome to Informer. Please like this video and subscribe our channel. In a world where people often don't appreciate loyalty, my faith was shattered. I found out my wife was cheating on me with her boss, and it broke my heart in every way possible. I didn't just sit back, I reacted angrily, both with words and physically. But then something strange happened that changed everything. This is my story told honestly. Enjoy hearing it. Dad, it's Mom. Pete smiled as he took the phone from his daughter. He had a good idea what the conversation was about, but since it was his first talk with his wife that morning, he was eager. He heard his wife asking, "Hey honey, can Teddy Bear watch a group of teenagers today? I think I can handle it." Eva and her friends have been planning this for a few weeks, so all I have to do is follow their plan. Eva and her friends are 19 or 20 years old, so I'm not trying to take care of little kids. She asked if he had set up the pool like she wanted. He said, "Yes, I did. There are chairs around the pool and the food is ready at the grill. I got everything ready while you were gone." "Next year you'll have to supervise," she teased. "Don't act like you're not excited about it. A bunch of teenagers will be in swimsuits all afternoon. I bet you'll be looking forward to my return. Remember, one of them is our daughter and the other two are like adopted daughters to us. I don't need a bunch of teenagers in bikinis to be ready for you. I'm always prepared for you every day." "I'm sure you know," he asked if she enjoyed her trip. She replied, "We did. It was a useful business meeting." Joan worked for a medium-sized financial company in a Nashville suburb and was a senior investment advisor, having been there for about 6 years. "That's great, honey. Have a safe trip back from San Jose." "Thanks. I'll see you later this afternoon. Love you, Joan." "Love you, Pete." Evie rolled her eyes at her father, though she was happy that her parents still loved each other as they did. She hoped to be as in love with her spouse after 25 years of marriage. Pete was lost in thought for a moment, thinking about Teddy Bear. Teddy Bear used to be his nickname when he was in love before they had kids. Then he became Daddy until their oldest child went to college. Since then, he's been her teddy bear. He didn't mind it much. She loved snuggling close to him and sleeping next to him. With Teddy Bear by his side, who could he complain to? He, his daughter, and her two best friends had been busy getting ready for the party. It was only 2 weeks until she and her friends started college classes. They all wanted to have a big celebration before heading off to different parts of the Southeast for their junior year. She was starting her junior year of medicine at Vanderbilt University, about 20 miles north of their home in Franklin, Tennessee. She lived with her lifelong best friends in an on-campus apartment. She was a very charming young woman like her mother, standing about 5 feet 6 inches tall and shapely. Lily and Carrie, her best friends, had stayed over and were helping that morning. Lily was also tall, slender, and attractive with African heritage. She was American with light brown skin and long, beautifully curled hair. She was an inch taller than Pete, which she playfully teased him about. He didn't mind. He cherished her and enjoyed having her around. She was like a sister to Evie and a second daughter to him. She and his daughter had been inseparable since 3rd grade. She was on a track and field scholarship at Vanderbilt, which covered part of her tuition. She competed in the 800 meters, 100 meters, and mile events. When she was younger, she used to run with Pete, but as she grew older, he told her that he could no longer keep up with her as he was slowing her down. She missed running with him. She was a brilliant young woman who specialized in mathematics and computer science. Carrie Eve, her other close friend, was the first individual she encountered on her initial day of elementary school. Carrie had spilled her lunch, which their caretaker had prepared, and even shared half of it with her, as her parents had always motivated her to help others. When Lily arrived, they formed their own rendition of the Three Musketeers, as they were nearly inseparable. Carrie only scored a 1E300 on her SATs, but she managed to get into Vanderbilt thanks to her family's wealth and prior connections. They joked that she could have gotten a really low score and still gotten in. In high school, instead of being voted most likely to succeed or getting some other silly award, she was labeled as the most likely to buy an island. She was a small, blonde doll with a charming figure on her tiny frame. They were a great group, like 3 sisters. Pete liked having all 3 of them around with him. Outside, there was a kitchen next to the 2-story pool house under the backyard pavilion. Pete built almost everything himself over the years. They had set the table for lunch, and the rest of their friends were expected to arrive soon. It was a beautiful August day. The lounge chairs were set up, the pool was clean, and Pete had mowed and trimmed the lawn. Eva seemed to have gotten her mother's organizational and event planning skills, and she had kept her father busy for the past 2 days. She was his little girl, and she spoke highly of him whenever she got the chance. He was more modest than boastful, and he was confident in his skills, but chose not to flaunt them. She figured managing and maintaining his modest consulting firm would be enough for him. She didn't concern herself with what other men did. She knew the fathers of most of the girls who visited, and if there were a vote on who had the best dad, hers would likely receive the majority of first-place votes. After helping to serve a lovely array of food and non-alcoholic drinks, Pete said, "Okay, ladies, I am heading back inside. Let me know if you need anything." Lily asked, "Are you sure you don't want to stay out here and dine with us?" "Thank you, Lily. This is for everyone to enjoy." "I'm fine," he replied. This afternoon was meant just for the girls. He kept himself busy in his office, where he could see the pavilion and a part of the pool. When the girls started taking off their cover-ups and clothes to reveal their swimsuits, he went to the den to watch the Braves play a game, so he wouldn't seem like he was intruding. He had been watching for about 20 minutes when he heard noise outside by the pool and went to check. He saw a strong young man grabbing Carrie's wrist and trying to pull her away from her friends, who were yelling at him to stop and let her go. The man, who was maybe 6 feet tall, noticed Pete and smirked, not slowing down as he dragged a protesting Carrie toward the exit. Little Carrie didn't even weigh 115 pounds, and he was about twice her size. As Pete got closer, the man pushed Lily aside and she stumbled. Pete tried to catch her, but her tall body bumped into his nose and chest. For a moment he felt dizzy, but then he quickly recovered and rushed to stand between Carrie and the intruder, Ricky. "Let me go," Ricky shouted. "Carrie and girls, step back," Pete ordered. All the other girls moved back from the 3 people in the fight, but not too far. Some people took out their phones to film. "I said let her go," Pete repeated firmly. Pete got close to Ricky, who thought he didn't have to worry about Pete because he was taller and heavier and had Carrie's wrist in his grip. He tried to punch Pete with his left hand, which was his first mistake. Pete ducked and, with momentum, landed a strong punch to Ricky's stomach. A large breath burst out of his mouth, and he leaned back, absorbing the impact and quickly releasing Carrie. Pete delivered a forceful knee to Ricky's back, making him fall to his hands and knees. "Get out of my backyard." Jerk Ricky cautiously stood up and replied, "You're not as tough as my dad told me you were. I'm going to enjoy throwing you around." The larger man prepared to hit Pete again, but the punch was so predictable that Pete had time to prepare a response. Clearly, this man lacked training. Fortunately, Pete ducked under the wide right hook and positioned his right foot behind the jerk's right leg as firmly as he could. Ricky, already unsteady from his failed swing, toppled over Pete's knee and crashed onto his back. Pete answered, "Just leave." "I don't want to hurt you," several young women chuckled as the shorter man confronted the clearly outmatched bigger man. Ricky's laughter didn't help as he stood up, and he was ignored. "You move quite well for a teddy bear, though my dad calls you a tiny teddy bear." Pete wondered about the source of his knowledge. How did he know about Ricky? They confronted him again, but Pete was becoming annoyed. He knew he had to maintain his composure before he lost his temper. Rick tried to land a right jab, but failed miserably with a left punch instead. Pete dodged it and awaited Ricky's next move, another right hook that seemed to start from miles away and slowly passed by Pete's head. As Ricky's arms swept over, Pete moved in and unleashed a powerful combination on Ricky's right side, targeting his kidneys and liver. Pete felt like it was the hardest punch he'd ever thrown. Ricky fell right away and took almost a minute to get up on his hands and knees. The laughing stopped as he struggled to stand. Pete grabbed one of Ricky's arms, twisted it behind his back, and squeezed his fingers so hard they almost broke. When Ricky finally got up, Pete walked him out through the still open gate and pushed him onto the driveway. After letting Ricky go, he stumbled away, holding his side like an old man. Ricky was done fighting, but he still had things to say. "You may call your wife darling, but my father calls her his sweet kitten. Just because she says she's traveling doesn't mean she really is. Sometimes they stay close so she can be with him without any interruptions, just a few days away from home." Pete replied, "You're right. If you want to keep insulting my wife, we can go back into the yard, and you can keep blabbering, jerk. I wouldn't believe you even if you said you had proof. After this embarrassment, all you have left are lies. I'll believe it when I see it with my own eyes." Pete motioned to his hand. Even then, someone might have tampered with it. Ricky just grinned as Pete surveyed the area. Ricky spotted a Mercedes and slammed his fist on the hood of her SUV forcefully, enough to dent it. Pete finally noticed the commotion caused by the other girls. They were shouting and making rude gestures at the young man. Pete had been so focused just moments earlier that he hadn't seen them. Ricky staggered to his BMW and drove off. Pete turned to see several young women making vulgar gestures at Ricky. While recording the incident on their phones, Pete declared, "Come on ladies, the show's over, let's head back inside. And please don't share that video with anyone yet. Let's talk about it for a few minutes first." He heard Eva shout, "Daddy, your nose is bleeding." Soon after, Lily was commanding everyone to clear a space for Pete on a chaise lounge chair under one of the umbrellas. "Eva, go find him some clean clothes, Carrie. Grab him a bag of ice." She convinced him to sit down, then started tearing his shirt to make a compress for his nose. The other 11 girls watched, surprised to see a fit man in his late 40s. They were shocked by what had happened. Pete was surrounded by about a dozen bikini-clad girls who were ready to help him, but Lily was taking charge, so their help seemed uncertain. One girl went to get him a drink, another tried to help him lie down, and the rest were talking about what happened and looking at Pete. When Carrie and Evie came back, Pete put ice on his nose and asked who the jerk was. "Carrie, what did he want from you?" Evie stepped forward and explained that the jerk, Ricky Farmington, was the son of her mother's boss, Andrew Farmington. The conversation quickly shifted from dismissing Ricky as a foolish kid to realizing he might know something. Pete wanted to hide his concern from the others. Carrie mentioned that he was following her because they had dated briefly a few weeks ago, and when he invited her out again, she refused. She tried to remain friendly, but he was quite unpleasant about it. "I'm sorry he showed up here. I'm not certain how he found me, but I suspect someone on the team posted about today's gathering on social media." She pleaded with her friends to stop what they were doing. Turning to Pete, she inquired, "Mr. Clark, how did your nose start bleeding? He never hit you, did he?" Pete explained, "I think it was when I tried to stop my other daughter, Lily. She accidentally bumped into me with the side of her head, which hit my nose," and smiled at Lily. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Lily said. She had been calling him Dad for many years. "When he pushed me and you tried to grab me, we got tangled. I didn't mean to bump your nose," Pete reassured her. "Don't worry, it's not your fault," he realized. Lily felt relieved to hear that. Then Pete talked about the videos. "I know this is a big thing to ask, but please don't share any video of what happened with anyone outside this group. No social media posts, emails, or text messages to your friends. Nothing, please." "Why, Daddy? You didn't do anything wrong. You could have hurt him badly if you wanted to," Eva questioned. Pete explained, "Firstly, I don't want any false accusations against your mother to spread. We know they're not true, but they still don't look good. Also, someone that angry might seek revenge against Carrie, me, or any of us if that video went viral. Do you see? He might feel embarrassed and seek revenge. He still could, but I'd hate for one of you to be out late at night, leaving a movie theater or a college class, and have him sneak up from behind and attack you because he's angry, foolish, or drunk. Sure, he'd get arrested eventually, but with his temper, he could be dangerous and cause permanent harm," Eva insisted. "Will you call the police?" "I'm afraid so. We don't need to decide whether to press charges right now, but he attacked Carrie and Lily and tried to attack me," Pete replied. A few girls chuckled at Ricky's failed attempt to hurt the smaller man. "He also damaged the hood of Carrie's car and trespassed. I'm sure there are other offenses. I'll have someone come out and take our statements. It shouldn't take long. I apologize, but we have to do this." "Can you still have your pool party?" he asked Carrie. "Is your car okay?" "Yes, I think so," Carrie confirmed firmly, "so it might bruise but cause no further damage." Pete nodded. Then Carrie asked, "Mr. C, where did you learn to handle someone like Ricky? He's a big guy in good shape. I know he has won a few fights. It's quite remarkable. Are you sure you want to hear this?" A dozen bikini-clad women nodded eagerly. Not a displeasing sight. "When I was in high school, I was occasionally teased for my height. Both of my parents are short, so I knew this was unlikely to change. I was always in excellent shape because I participated in track in junior high and then cross-country in high school. I was quite skilled when I participated in the state finals, but during one evening when I was a junior, I had a date with a pleasant girl. After we left the movie theater, a few big bullies, similar to Ricky, tried to bother us. They managed to for a short time, but I decided to ignore them and keep moving forward. Since I was on a date, I didn't want to start a fight, so I let them push me a little. Luckily, some of my friends were there too. They saw what was happening and came to help us. We left only a few troublemakers behind, finished our date, and I went home feeling upset. I told my dad about it the next day. He helped me find a martial arts studio near our home in Knoxville. He encouraged me to do well, but also warned against starting fights. I promised to use what I learned to protect myself and others, and I started taking 2 classes every week until I went to Georgia Tech. While I was studying in Atlanta, I found a studio that offered different martial arts, including a silent close combat style, judo and jiu-jitsu. They didn't stick to one style, focusing instead on self-defense. I trained there throughout my 4 years at college. The instructor was an old man about my height, and his daughter, who was much smaller and in her late 30s, helped run the school. She was an amazing fighter, quick, fearless, and strong. I watched her spar with big, fast black belts who could barely touch her. They often regretted challenging her. I was determined to learn from her. So for 4 years, I attended 2 to 4 classes per week. I was progressing well, and even after I married John and we stayed in Atlanta, I reduced my training to 1 class per week. She has never seen me compete throughout our marriage. She is aware I train in our basement gym, but that's the extent of her knowledge. Eva, when you started college a few years back, I found a nearby studio and resumed my training. I'm not as skilled as I used to be, but I still manage quite well. Eva replied, "Daddy, I never knew you didn't have to, darling. Do you recall when we took you and Donnie to Paris? It was when he was in 9th grade and you were in 7th, she nodded. Do you remember when we drove to that Moroccan restaurant in the dim part of town? She nodded again. I told your mother I didn't want to go there because it didn't seem safe at night. Naturally, she disagreed. The discussion got heated after a while, but I eventually gave in as I usually do. It was a wonderful restaurant and I enjoyed it. Do you remember what occurred as we headed back to the car? Eva replied that 2 men, one tall and one short, approached us from behind and shouted for us to stop. You handed the keys to Mum and told her to take us to the car and start honking once we were inside. That's right, while the 3 of you were getting away, I was prepared to hold them off or scare them if she didn't arrive right away. I knew she would call the police, but I wondered how long it would take them to get to that part of town after you left. The tall one showed a knife and asked for money. I don't think he spoke much English besides that. I put my hands up like I didn't want any trouble, but he got closer, so I had to deal with him. I stood between him and the shorter man. I quickly took his knife and stabbed it into his knee. You probably didn't hear the scream he made. The shorter man pulled out his own knife. I hit him and his knife fell away from us. Meanwhile, the tall guy's scream brought some of his friends running toward us. At this moment, I began sprinting toward the car, hoping you were inside. I felt I had managed the first 2 assailants, but with 6 or 7 more approaching, I decided that discretion was the better part of valor. It was time for me to leave. When I heard the horn, I ran to the car. Your mother had already pulled onto the street ready to leave. I jumped into the front seat and told her to drive off. Since we'd been married, that was the only other time I had faced such a situation until today. That was a slight untruth. What I neglected to mention was that after Donnie and Eve were born, just before they moved to Nashville, he and Joan had gone dancing one night while still residing in Atlanta. Bobby Taylor, her old college boyfriend and Atlanta Falcons football player, got in touch with them. Joan appeared indifferent, but Pete was livid when he asked Joan to dance and she accepted. They only danced for a brief period, but when Pete saw him enter the bathroom, he followed the athlete, a tall wide receiver, and started talking about how much he missed Joan and suggested they might dance a bit more that evening. Pete was not in the mood because the former boyfriend was trying to maneuver past him to leave the restroom. Pete shoved him to the ground. The large man fell awkwardly, landing on his arm and breaking his collarbone at the elbow, which ended his season. The Falcons had to bring in a replacement who performed so well that Bobby was later traded to another team. No charges were filed. Pete continued on with his friends, so please do not share that footage with anyone before the day ends. There should only be 13 copies, including myself, and no more. They all assured Pete they would not share it. He hoped they meant it. I understand this spoils the mood, but do not dwell on it. Forget him, he's in a pit, Lily said. You mean he's in a pit? Pete smirked and several of the girls laughed. He stood up and went inside to call the police. When the officers arrived, they were welcomed by all the attractive women in their bathing who quickly covered themselves, and he asked them to recount what had happened. He checked the wrist of the car, which was still red but not severely injured. Pete's nose had stopped bleeding, so he changed his shirt. Carrie's mom came over because her dad hadn't come back from a trip yet. The whole conversation lasted only 30-40 minutes. The party started again once the police car drove away. Carrie hugged her mom and watched as she left. Dad, do you mind if we stay here until we go to Carrie's? Eva asked. We planned to go dancing after dinner, but after this afternoon, we'd rather dance here tonight. It's your home, Eva. You know I don't mind. "I love having you here," he replied. She hugged her father and then went back to her friends. Pete watched the last inning of the Braves game, which they were clearly losing. While watching, he got a text from Jones saying their plane was delayed and they would be home late. He sighed, feeling a slight doubt creeping in, especially after some of Ricky's remarks that felt personal. He wanted his wife to return so they could talk. Pete danced with more of his friends, or rather, they danced around him. They tried teaching him the electric slide again, but he still couldn't get it right, which made everyone, including Pete, laugh. Around 10 p.m., they needed to go to Carrie's house, which had many bedrooms. Pete got sweet hugs, kisses, and thank yous from all the young girls as they left. After some help, it didn't take long to clean up outside. He heard the garage door open as he was taking out the trash. Joan was home. He went outside to help her with her bag, and she gave him a warm hug and a quick kiss on the lips as he approached. "I missed you, baby." "How was the party?" she asked. "It was interesting," he replied. "I'll tell you about it in a minute." They had just left for cars for the night. "I thought they were going out dancing," he added. "They decided to dance here. I'm sure you saw that. Did you turn off the light and watch them from inside?" This slightly upset him, but he replied, "No, Lily took me outside with her and I danced with most of them before they left. If I weren't so tired after the cross-country journey and delays, I'm confident you'd be in a good mood right now. I'd be happy to look after you." Pete wasn't feeling it either, he said. "Let me bring your bag inside and offer you a glass of wine. I have quite a tale to share." She was captivated by the events that had occurred and followed him inside. When he came back to the living room, she drank her wine and observed him sit opposite her, not next to her. She chuckled, assuming the situation was serious. Pete proceeded to explain the events, including calling the police, but left out Ricky's conversation. She was astonished that someone could just invade their home and attack innocent Carrie. Pete then disclosed the identity of the aggressor. "His name is Ricky Farmington. Andrew's nickname is Ricky," Pete explained. Jan looked surprised and said, "No way, I can't believe he would do that. There must be some mistake." Pete clarified that Andrew had failed to teach him some important values. Then he thought about things like being polite, showing respect, knowing how to defend himself, and when to keep quiet. Joan paused for a moment. "Wait a minute, Ricky's huge. But are you saying you tossed him out like trash?" She chuckled lightly, then laughed even more. "You're joking, right? My husband, all 165 pounds of you, beating that giant? He looks almost twice your size." "Okay, what's the joke?" Pete wasn't happy. She saw his sad face and tried to cheer him up. "Come on, Pete. I'm not trying to make you upset, but let's be reasonable." Pete stood up and said, "Good night, Joan." "Don't be sulky, dear. I didn't mean anything bad," she told him. "What else could I have done? I'll join you after I finish this drink." She was surprised when he replied, "Don't bother." Joan called after him as she went to the kitchen to put her glass in the sink, but he didn't answer. When she went upstairs to their bedroom, he wasn't there. He was in the guest room. She asked Pete, "What are you doing here?" "I missed you, and I was planning to cuddle with my teddy bear tonight," Pete replied. He was curious about why she used the nickname. Was it because she cared or because she was being mean? He could get really upset about it now, but he was tired and needed to think clearly in the morning. So he said, "Well, I guess we'll both be disappointed then," and locked the door. After she knocked and begged for several minutes, she finally left and went to their bedroom, confused by what had happened. "My husband must be losing his mind," she thought. She thought about texting her daughter to find out more, but decided it was too late. She'd talk to her in the morning. Plus, her husband couldn't have done what he said. It seemed impossible. Pete thought she'd sleep in the next day after a long trip and adjusting from West Coast time. He wondered if she had gone somewhere, which worried him because now he doubted everything. He sneaked into their bedroom, grabbed some running clothes, changed, and had a small breakfast. When he heard her starting to wake up, he went for a long run, covering 7 miles in just under 53 minutes. When he got back, Joan looked upset. "Mister, we need to talk." "I don't think you told me everything last night," she said, but he ignored her and went into the shower. She followed him, but when she got into the bathroom, he locked the door. She banged on the door, but he kept showering and shaving. Once he was dressed and refreshed, he was ready to talk to his wife. He went downstairs to his home office where she was already waiting. "Andrew called me this morning. I'm not sure I understood everything from last night. Ricky had blood in his urine and had to go to the late yesterday," she explained. "It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," she remarked. Ricky informed Andrew that he was just talking to Carrie when Pete suddenly appeared behind him and hit him in the back with something. They suspect Pete bruised a kidney. Andrew wants to press charges. Pete replied, "Why am I not surprised that the little jerk lies about the incident? He's probably embarrassed that your tiny teddy bear tossed him out like trash, as you said." Andrew is quite upset. "Why did you do that? Why did you attack him?" "I confronted the unfortunate boy because he was harassing Carrie. The Carrie we've adored as though she were our own child for over a decade. We brought Carrie, Eva, and Lily to Spain for 2 weeks to celebrate Eva and their high school graduations. That same Carrie was being yanked out of our backyard by that rude person, and I intervened. Are you implying you trust their story but not your husband's? Do you think I blindsided him?" Joan stated, "I apologize, Pete. There's no way you could have. Do it face to face." Pete wanted to confront her directly. How could that naive boy understand what he knew? Pete was livid that he had to overlook that for now because all he had was Ricky's second-hand info and not enough proof to confront her without her dodging the allegation easily. And if it's true, she'll be more careful in the future. The whole situation seemed suspicious, but if the accusations were true, they were addressed. "So you don't think I could handle it face-to-face, man-to-man? No offense, honey. I love you more than anyone, but he's big and in great shape, and you just don't compare to him. Remember Paris? You were running as fast as you could with that small guy chasing you, trying to reach the car before he could catch you. That was after I managed the big guy. He wasn't going to catch me, and I was running because Pete halted. It was clear what she thought of him, recounting a hard-fought and successful fight. Battles wouldn't be efficient, he could see it was a futile effort, possibly in more ways than one, she added. Do you realize how difficult this will make my life? That took Peter back. Excuse me, what was I supposed to do? Would you have rather I used a gun? I'd like to know what you think I hit him with my hands, he answered. I've seen you train in our basement gym. You hit the bag hard, but I can't see how you could have hurt Ricky by merely striking him. How could you have hit him without surprising him? Thanks for trusting me, sweetie. It really boosts my confidence, he said sarcastically. She rolled her eyes and groaned. Come on, that's not helpful. What do I tell Andrew? You tell him he raised his disrespectful son to be a troublemaker, just like him, and Ricky owes an apology to both Carrie and me. I will. Ricky told him what happened, and it seems Pete did nothing wrong, she explained. Pete shook his head. You must be crazy to trust him over your spouse. Did Andrew offer you any drugs while you were away? Joan's expression turned furious at the insult, and she was about to respond when they heard a car approach and honk. Thank you for the break. They stood to see who was there. It was a large dented vehicle and people got out. Eva, Lily, Carrie and her father, Brian, all three girls rushed to hug Pete, then Joan a bit later. Brian stepped forward and shook his hand. Pete, I want to thank you for looking after Carrie. It means so much to me that you would do this. She is everything to me. I will be eternally grateful. Pete shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. You know we cherish Carrie. There's no way I was going to let that jerk take her. It just wasn't going to happen. You'd have done the same. Brian nodded and Joan said, Girls, could you please clarify what happened? Ricky told his father a different version of events than Pete told me. Eva said, You're getting two different stories and you don't believe Dad. Well, not exactly. That's not what I'm saying. I just prefer to hear it from someone else. I'm not certain how that all sounds. Ridiculous. Pete shook his head and walked back inside. He wouldn't stay there long as the girls explained the entire incident to Joan. Pete grabbed his laptop and an overnight bag. He was leaving before he said something he couldn't take back. He needed time to think about what he should do next. When Pete went back outside, Brian, Carrie and Lily were gone, leaving Joan confused. How could her husband have done this? When he saw the shock on his wife's face, he realized how badly he had messed up, especially since she was focused on how this affected her and her career, not him, their daughter, or Carrie. It said a lot. Pete asked, So what are we going to do about that jerk? Someone needs to teach him basic manners, Joan scoffed. And you think you're the one to do it. Pete couldn't believe it. She had just heard 3 people corroborate his story, but she still doubted his capability to manage the situation. She must think I'm some kind of a coward. He thought Joan probably still furious. Pete smirked, recalling that Ricky was probably still in pain. The next thing she said shocked him. I doubt he'd be so fortunate next time. The look on Pete's face alerted her. She had crossed a line. She meant it and was merely trying to shield her husband from danger. How could he face such a formidable, strong young man directly? She observed as his expression shifted from disbelief to anger. When did you lose all respect for me as a man, Joan? You didn't always treat me like this. You used to trust me. I see that trust is now gone. You're being ridiculous. My feelings for you haven't changed. I'm proud of you and everything we've accomplished together, so call me doubtful. But did you know I have C-level executives from numerous Fortune 500 companies in my contacts list? These people come to me at my company when they need help. That's how I make money. My business might not be as big as Andrew's, but me and my team are well respected in our field. It seems I get more respect there than at home these past few days. It's been really eye-opening about what you all think of me. What does this mean? No need to worry, I've made a decision. If that jerk, either him or his father, isn't here by 6 p.m. tomorrow to apologize to me and Carrie, then Brian and I will call the police and press charges. He also has to pay for the damage to her SUV. You can't be serious. I still have to work with Andrew. Maybe you can convince him to instruct his son on proper behavior and respect for others. Clearly he hasn't learned that from his dad, but given how much time you spend with him, I'm sure you know this. Pete, this could risk my job, so see what this is doing to us. But it seems you don't see it that way. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., Brian and I are calling the cops. I'm going out for a while. No, you're not. We're not done discussing this. We are done and I need some space from you. I'm going over to Brian's to talk about this. I'm not calling that fool's father because he listens to you. You can tell him what his son needs to do to avoid legal trouble. The clock is ticking. Pete, come back here. He ignored her, walked into the garage, placed his bag in his car and drove away with Joanne, who was standing there, hands on her hips, showing a frustrated frown on her face. Pete had never acted like this before. On his way to Brian's, Pete also decided that he needed to do some traveling for his business. What concerned him was that, based on his wife's reaction and her and Ricky's statements, she had already sided with Andrew. Allow him to see how close she was to Andrew at this point. He thought the naive kid had messed up. Damn you. Joan, Brian, and Pete talked and decided on 6 p.m. They would either call the police or wait until the next day. Pete checked into a nearby hotel and sat at the desk working while the Braves game played in the background around 5 p.m. His phone rang. He had blocked Joan's number on the home phone to enjoy some peace. He wondered who it could be. Hello? Hey, baby, hi, Daddy, she said. I'm heading back to the apartment. Are you close to Vanderbilt? Eva lived in a college apartment with Carrie and Lily. All Vanderbilt undergraduates must reside on campus when campus housing allocations seem to be determined by random drawings. The three undergraduates residing together in one of those excellent apartments was an unusual setup. Supposedly, there is an exceedingly complex selection process for obtaining one of those coveted apartments. He assumed Brian simply asked how much he had to donate to the institution to secure it, and it happened. Brian and his wife came from families with substantial old money. He also succeeded in entertainment law in Nashville. He came from a long line of Williamsons and had contributed significantly to the Williamson Medical Center in Franklin, Tennessee, the county seat. Pete says, I'm at the house and there's plenty of room for 13. I will be there in a few minutes. 10 minutes later, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, Eva embraced him tightly. I don't understand, Daddy. Why would a man not believe as I'd say she doubts I can protect my family, Ava stated. She should I told her about Paris. Pete shrugged. Let me guess. She didn't believe you, Eva nodded, and he saw a tear fall from her eye. He said, I'm sorry, baby. Maybe Big Andrew convinced her that I wasn't up to the task. I don't know. You shouldn't believe what that guy said, he remarked for the second time. He wanted to explain that he thought John no longer respected him as a man because she was likely cheating with someone much bigger than him. He wanted to tell his daughter that it seemed her mother was cheating, but he didn't. He denied everything, saying it was all nonsense. Pete hated lying to his daughter, but he didn't want her to think poorly of her mother. They might turn out to be true, and while things weren't looking good, this was merely a guess at the moment. Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything will be okay. You'll see. She said, I want to trust you, Daddy, but I'm scared. Don't be. We'll be fine. He reassured. She wondered if Min and he were a family. She left a few minutes later. School would start again in a few weeks, and she still had a few days left of her summer internship at the University Medical Center. The next day, he checked his home security app on his phone to see when the garage doors opened and closed, marking when Joan left for work. Operating his own small consulting firm allowed him to work from home when he wasn't traveling. The downside was that he couldn't escape to the office if he was arguing with his wife. At lunch, he checked his messages. He received 20 texts from his wife, some lengthy, mostly about his unreasonable behavior. The last one read you're gone, he'll arrive at 6. I left you a voicemail. After checking his voicemail, he ignored them all, which he would eventually erase, but he listened to the final one. Pete. Andrew mentioned that Ricky would be there a few minutes before 6 tonight to apologize. I'm still upset with you for putting me in this position. We can talk about it after everyone has left. Pete rolled his eyes. It was still his fault. He was supposed to drive up to Louisville, Kentucky to conduct an operations planning session for one of his clients all day Thursday and Friday morning. He decided to drive there tonight after the apologies and arrive a few days early. He would pay for one night at a hotel himself and meet with the client in person on Wednesday at 5:45 p.m. Brian and Carrie arrived. She gave Pete a strong hug, and Brian shook his hand, saying, "This should be interesting. Are you and Joan okay? It looks like this was a tough spot for you." "Nothing to worry about. We will be here. She's just trying to wrap her head around her little hubby beating up Big Ricky," he said. "I'll admit I was surprised by how convincingly you did it rather than that you did it at all. I believe I shouldn't have been so certain. You've always appeared very prepared in all your endeavors." "Thank you, Brian. Hopefully Joan will keep this in mind as well. If you don't mind, we'll wait outside since I do not want that trash in my house." "I wouldn't either." A few minutes before 6 p.m., a red two-door BMW pulled up in their driveway. Ricky didn't seem happy when he got out of the car. Joan hadn't arrived yet. He walked up to the three of them standing there and said, "Carrie, I'm sorry for Saturday. I missed you and wanted us to hang out again, but I was turned down. I know we won't be going out again, but I hope I didn't ruin our friendship." He looked sorry, but Pete thought he just wanted another chance to win her over someday. Carrie replied, "I'm not sure if we can be friends again, Ricky, but I'll try to be polite and friendly. That's the best I can offer right now." Ricky then turned to Brian. "Mr. Williamson, I'm sorry for what happened to Carrie and her son. Just send us the bill and we'll take care of it," he said, though his apologies didn't seem sincere. Brian just nodded. When Ricky faced Pete, his regret seemed to disappear. "Mr. Clark, I'm sorry for ruining the party and trespassing on your property. I shouldn't have done that, okay?" Pete replied. "Thank you, Ricky," assuming they were finished, before Ricky walked back to his car. As he reached the car door, he grinned, and everyone noticed. He looked at Pete and silently said the word, "kitten." Pete opened his hand and gestured to it like he did on Saturday, showing he trusted him once he saw proof. Ricky smirked and got into his car. "What did he tell you before he left?" Pete shook his head. "Nothing important. We spoke briefly as he was leaving the other day. He mentioned it again, probably to annoy me. Carrie wanted to speak, but regretted ever agreeing to go out with him initially." "What a terrible choice." Brian commented, "So if you need any help with him, let me know. With one call, I can gather a legal team to represent him and his father. I might even get a deputy or two to follow him for a few weekends for fun." He smiled at the thought. "Thank you, Brian. Let's hold off on that for now. I have some other matters to address." "First," Carrie replied. Brian nodded. After dropping off Eva at home yesterday, Carrie told her parents about Ricky's rude remarks about Joan. They had known Joan for years, and none believed he was truthful, at least. They hoped not. Brian and Pete exchanged handshakes. Carrie hugged him goodbye and they drove off. Pete locked the garage and left after they had gone. As he exited his driveway, Joan's car arrived. Pete did not bother to wave as he directed his vehicle north towards Louisville. He planned to use the drive to figure out his next steps regarding collecting evidence, among other things. Most crucially, he needed some space. He was still upset with his wife for the disrespect and with Ricky's accusations. He knew he should avoid saying anything he might regret later. He intended to use the time apart to cool down and prepare. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. He hesitated but answered, thinking he had nothing to lose except his annoyance. Maybe he could convince her to leave him alone while he was away. "Hello, Joan," Pete said. "Pete, I hope you're just going to the store and coming right back," Joan replied. "No, my client needed me in Louisville a few days early. I'll stay until after our lunch on Friday. I should be back in time for dinner with you afterward." Then he decided to ask a bit more, assuming she wouldn't be traveling with Andrew that weekend. Her response surprised him. "What? No, I only travel every 6 to 8 weeks. Why would you suggest that? It was nothing if you had been there on Saturday. You would have observed the entire affair. I'm still somewhat upset that you've sided with Ricky. I am certain you are, and I apologize. Andrew isn't very pleased either, but that is understandable. Did Ricky come to make amends?" Pete mentioned he seemed to genuinely apologize to Carrie. but I suspect that was because he might still want to try to sleep with her someday. He apologized to Brian and me, but it was the most insincere apology I've ever received. You and Andrew should be relieved that he isn't facing jail time. He's just a youth, Pete. He is a 20-year-old adult who needs to learn to manage his temper and show respect to others. Joan gave a noticeable sigh. I would like to talk to you about all this tonight. Can we talk when you get home on Friday? Sure, I'll miss you, Pete. Pete thought she wouldn't have a pleasant week, Joan. He then ended the call. Joan was shocked by how he concluded their conversation. This was distressing her considerate husband, and she still felt he wasn't very aware of how the situation impacted her profession. She believed this would just be a blip in their long journey together. On Friday, she prepared him a lovely meal and planned to provide him a restful night in the bedroom. This would all pass. It took just over 3 hours to reach Louisville. Enough time to consider what he needed to do. He was convinced that the brat Ricky knew too much for it to be mere gossip. It spoke volumes about his father that he would disclose such details to his son. But if Andrew is the type of person who has affairs with married women, it's not shocking that he's not an ideal father. The only suspicion he had was that Joan and Andrew were unfaithful while on a holiday. Of course, they might also be intimate in town, as Ricky hinted. Andrew was divorced, so they wouldn't need a hotel. However, Pete suspected Ricky would try to find evidence to confront him with. He could try to make something up, but Pete would be careful to notice that. Pete planned to be away as much as possible in the next few weeks. If she was unfaithful while he was gone, they might be careless and do it at their house. Andrew seemed like the type of jerk who would dare to try it, and Joan seemed so devoted to Andrew that she might allow it to happen. Perhaps he should employ someone to follow them. He sighed, unable to understand what had transpired, but Joan's disdain for him was unexpected. I was curious how long he had been oblivious to his love for his wife. He went to Amazon immediately after checking into his hotel. He created a new account and bought several different concealed Wi-Fi cameras, which he intended to set up around his house. They would arrive at his hotel by Thursday. Hopefully they wouldn't capture anything, but he wasn't optimistic about the chances. It was a tough week for everyone. Iva reached out to her father a few times, and he assured her he was fine. Donnie called once to check on him, and Pete told him the same. Everything was okay. Joan sent text and voice messages telling him how much she loved and missed him. They were conveniently ignored while Pete was with his clients. He was thankful for that, because he didn't want to speak to Joan. On Friday, he drove 3.5 hours home, dreading what awaited him. However, it turned out better than expected. Joan was elegantly dressed when he arrived, in a beautiful dress that reached just above her knees, wearing high heels and fine jewelry, which Pete assumed meant she wanted to go out for dinner. In her heels, she was the same height as him, which never bothered him. He always enjoyed having her by his side. That night he was okay with her going out because it would put her in a good mood and likely prevent any discussions from becoming serious until they returned home. He dressed quickly, and she asked him to take them to a fashionable steakhouse that she knew he enjoyed, reminiscent of the nights when they would attend performances. She spent the whole night by his side, annoyed after one of her shoes slipped off, and caressed his leg under the table. He loathed that she could influence him so strongly. While still upset, he wondered how many more evenings like this would follow, hoping he was wrong yet aware his suspicions were accurate. When they got home, she was all over him the moment they entered. They hadn't reached the living room before she removed her dress and thong and was at his zipper, set in the bed, standing there in her garters and heels, which had the intended effect on Pete. Joan didn't resist when he pulled her up, turned her around, and had his way with her while she lay on the couch. She pulled him up the stairs to the bedroom and did it again. That was great. I really needed it, Pete, she said happily. Pete hugged his wife and replied, I love you too, Joan. After resting on him for a few more minutes, she went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. When she returned to the bedroom, she snuggled back into her husband's arms, wrapped his arm around herself, and fell asleep feeling content, believing that everything was fine in the world. The next morning, Joan woke up early and traced circles on her husband's chest. When she saw that he was fully awake, she whispered, Thank you for last night, it was amazing. He agreed that it had been wonderful. My pleasure, sweetheart, he said. The word sweetheart reminded him of something Ricky had mentioned. Joan continued, I need to tell you something, but I hope you won't be too upset. I have to go to Memphis on Thursday to meet with one of our university clients. They want a detailed review of their portfolio. I should be back on Friday. Pete asked, How did this happen? Aren't these things planned out further in advance? She explained, Usually they are, but a rival has been approaching them. and they are one of my key clients, so Andrew has asked me to go and talk some sense into them. So you're going alone this time? He questioned. Yes, I am. They've been with me a long time, so everything should be okay, she reassured. He sat quietly for a moment, thinking. She asked, Are you okay? Yes, I am. In a similar situation, I have to travel next weekend and all the following week. The VP of Supply Chain at General Dynamics Gulfstream Division has invited me to a supply chain meeting. I met him at a conference in Orlando. Then I'll be with them at their Savannah facility for the rest of the week, he explained. She sat up at that news, revealing herself, which was quite a sight as her breasts were still moving slightly while she sat, not caring much about anything else anymore. Pete reacted by pulling her closer to him so he could begin kissing her. Pete had always admired her figure because she remained voluptuous and had large breasts to match. Joan wanted to hear more about his notable trip. A slow morning of love followed by a refreshing shower had become rare for them in recent years, and they both cherished the chance. She regretted that they didn't do it more often, but acknowledged it was her responsibility as well. Pete detested the thought that everything was about to end terribly. She didn't want to ask during breakfast, but she did anyway. Pete, we didn't talk about last weekend. Are we okay? I hope you know how much I love you. We need to find a solution because I have long-term plans for us. She said. He smiled and squeezed her hand. I would like that too, Joan. Even though he hadn't expected it, he had to admit her effort. She tried all weekend and early the next week to show him love, not just through intimacy like she hadn't in many years. He did his best to reciprocate, but he truly felt the end was near. Over the weekend, he put a small GPS tracker on her car to see where she went. He took all the Amazon packages hidden in his car's trunk and arranged them. He swapped smoke detectors, books on shelves, and wall outlets with devices that hid Wi-Fi cameras and microphones. He added more outdoor cameras to his security system. Now his house was fully equipped with video and audio surveillance, but instead of feeling prepared, he felt distressed. Joan kissed him goodbye on Thursday morning, and he asked if she would drive her car to Memphis or hire one. I will take mine. Don't worry, my employer will cover my mileage and it's safer in my own car, she replied. Okay, be careful, I will. Darling, love you, he said. I love you too, he responded. It didn't take long to confirm his suspicions a few hours later when she should have been at their Brentwood office or on I-40 heading to Memphis. The GPS in her car showed she was somewhere else. His marriage was effectively over. Pete needed to let off steam, so he went to his dojo to spar with anyone available and then train. He wanted to stay sharp because if the chance arose, he'd confront Andrew physically. So much for only using self-defense. Thank you again, he muttered. Joan had the decency to text him later that day to inform him she had safely arrived in Memphis, although the GPS still displayed her car at Andrew's house. He made plans for a fake trip to Orlando and decided he would call tomorrow to figure out how to inform his wife. He didn't need to bother early Friday morning. An email arrived in his company inbox titled Kitty Bear. The message read, I found your email on your website. I've been working on my father, and he warned me that soon I'll be in the same situation as you. There was a link to a cloud account filled with hours of footage from various cameras in Andrew's home. It seemed to be recently installed and was recording events live. He watched the first video and saw Joan and Andrew entering the house. Andrew began undressing her in the living room, and just like Pete, the previous Friday, Andrew had Joan bent over his couch. Pete had seen enough. He drove to the airport, parked in long-term parking, called his wife and predictably reached her voicemail. He left a message saying, I am at the airport and leaving now. I will text you while I'm away with the airport's ambient noise. It sounded like he was taking a flight, but he did not fly anywhere. Instead, he went to the airport Marriott to hang out and examine the evidence he had on his wife. Pete didn't need or want to see them being intimate more than once. Just seeing her car at Andrew's overnight was sufficient. He was interested in what they might discuss, but it was soul-crushing even without watching the video. He had to listen to the moaning, groaning, slapping, and slurping, but he eventually discovered several crucial pieces of information. Andrew, I understand you're upset today and tomorrow, but there's no need for you to try to take back what's already yours. I know about that. Why would I need to take back something that's mine? I'm still upset that Ricky had to apologize. You need to learn to handle your husband better. I've been keeping him away as you asked, she lied. He shouted, do as I say if you want to enjoy the benefits that come with me. She was getting tired of this controlling and possessive behavior. She was pretty sure that Andrew was reaching his breaking point. If she wanted to save her marriage, she had to act. I know I like being with you, but I love Pete. He's a good father and husband. I'm not giving him up. Then why are you with me if you love him? He asked, smiling at her. You know why? It's exciting to be with someone stronger, she admitted. It's not just your strength, though I'm not complaining. He's a great lover. But sometimes I enjoy being with someone who still towers over me when I wear my heels. I like wearing a man's t-shirt that hangs below my rear. I love resting my hand on your arm and feeling more than just muscle. When they walked down the street together, she never worried about anyone confronting him, after all their years of working together. I was reminded that I had overlooked it occasionally. Don't worry, my dear, you continue taking care of me and I will keep looking after you. However, if you can't keep him in check, I might have to talk to him. I'm still upset with him for hitting Ricky unexpectedly, she confessed. You will not. If you try to harm even a single strand of his hair, you will regret it. You won't regret it. You won't hurt my husband, you understand. This surprised both Andrew and Pete. Andrew responded, all right, if he means that much to you, I won't harm the little guy. But don't forget whom you are tied to. That remark annoyed her, because she did not belong anywhere, but if she did, it was with her husband. Also, keep him under control. I don't want him to creep up and hit me from behind. That would not end well for him, she declared. I told you that the women told me you didn't do that. I'm not sure how, but he apparently defeated him fairly. Andrew chuckled. I'm sure they just made up their stories. That little kitty could never defeat Ricky, no way. He's not a kitten, but if he is, he's my cat. Dare you let me look after him, Andrew chuckled. For now, I'll be satisfied as long as I get to look after you. She wondered what he meant by for now. She didn't have to wait long to find out. The second interesting conversation happened after he left the note at the airport. Pete predicted what would happen based on Andrew's behavior. Joan said, well, he's gone for a week. Andrew's smile wasn't pleasant when he said, great, we can now take a couple more days off and continue to be together. Joan replied, yes, but if you keep being so rough, you'll bruise me. How will I explain that to him? Well, you weren't supposed to be with him much, if at all. So how would he know he still sees me getting dressed? You told me you enjoy it when I tease him. Andrew grinned at the idea. Well, if we get to be together for the next week, you should hold off for a few days. Otherwise, he might notice how tired you are, she mentioned. A cool bath and 24 hours usually are enough for me to recover. Besides, he's not much smaller than you. Andrew did not want to hear that. Taking control, he said, this is what we will do. I'll be as gentle as you want, but not in my house or while we're traveling. I will be with you however I want. If we are at your place, I'll be as sweet as your adorable little husband. You mentioned he wouldn't return until next Friday night. This worried Joan because she and Andrew had never been together at her house before. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Do you remember what I said yesterday? She asked. Andrew replied firmly, you do what I say and everything will be fine. If it bothers you so much, I won't stay at your house. We'll just have a few extended lunches there. That will seem very harmless. Joan hesitated for a few moments, but eventually agreed. Pete, Orlando, and Savannah thought she should be okay. Okay, only long lunches, she confirmed. This just made Joan more determined to leave Andrew soon, but she wondered how. Andrew smirked, knowing she would have a hard time getting rid of him once he was inside the house. He wasn't worried about Pete arriving early. He could handle upset spouses, especially one as small as Pete. After they left Andrew's house, Pete copied all the videos from the cloud folder. He planned to erase the server files, leaving Pete with the only copies, unless Ricky had saved them elsewhere. Pete had several calls to make. His first call was to Brian. Hey Brian, this is Pete. Just a moment. Sure, buddy. I have a few. Remember the conversation we had at my house when Ricky came to apologize? I do. Pete stated Ricky's claims seemed to be true. Joan has been unfaithful. I'm not sure how long this has been going on, but it's been a while, man. I'm very sorry. I assume this isn't a social call. I'm sorry, I don't know any divorce lawyers, Pete replied. Brian offered to help, saying, I know someone who can help. She can be tough or quick, depending on what you need. Pete agreed, saying, that sounds great. Just make sure she keeps everything confidential until I give Joan the documents, maybe next week. Brian assured him, I'll take care of it. I feel sorry for both of you. We have always admired you and, Joan, Pete stated. Thank you, Brian. I'm regretful too. I owe you. No, you don't. We've been friends for a long time and our daughters have too. This is simply me helping a friend. When everything is settled, you are welcome to treat me to a beer or two. I think I'd appreciate that. Consider it done. Brian connected feared family attorney Charles with Pete, and she began preparing divorce papers that evening. He noticed Joan's car had returned to their house. and just as Pete was about to fall asleep, his phone rang. It was Joan. "Hello, Peter. How's Orlando? Hot and humid with a chance of rain, which is typical for late August." "How about Memphis?" she replied. "You mean Nashville? I returned this afternoon. It's lonely without you. I wish we had another Friday night like last Friday." "Yes, I'd like that too." Pete wished he could go back to a month ago when he believed his wife was loyal and relive a night like last Friday. They talked for a bit longer before Joan expressed her love for Pete. Pete reciprocated, saying he loved her too. Ending the call left Pete feeling deeply sad, but as he dwelled on it, he grew angrier. The following day, Saturday, he decided to rent a car and visit a different dojo to train. He couldn't risk going to his usual spot in case someone there recognized his wife or kids and told others he was in town. After some searching, he found a dojo near Opry that allowed him to train. He spent both Saturday and Sunday sparring and working out there. There were excellent workouts, and he felt confident about his current level of skill. He texted Joan, and she texted back. He noticed her car at their house, and the camera showed she was there alone on Saturday but evidently visited her on Sunday. This saddened him. He was about to lose his family. He had not anticipated losing the children, however. With the impending divorce, their family unit would be no more. After a few minutes, his sadness turned into resolute action. He reasoned, "Well, I guess you have to handle what life presents you," which was exactly what he intended to do. Brian called Pete on Monday morning, which was unexpected. "Pete, I needed to give you a brief call. Joan called Miriam last night. She asked if she might forward her resume to our investment advisors because she felt it was time for a change. Miriam said she'd look into it." "What are your thoughts? I understand this doesn't excuse the affair, but perhaps she is trying to distance herself from Pete for a while. He considered his family, what he intended to do, and how his life was likely to unfold. She would never be his wife again. She would probably face fewer issues with the kids if she could distance herself from Andrew." "Yes, go ahead, the damage has already been done, but I believe that will make life easier for everyone." I understand by Monday afternoon Charlotte had completed the divorce paperwork, and Pete wondered if the encounter at his house would occur soon. Joan called Pete that night to tell him she missed and loved him. He tried to reciprocate the affection. Later, Donnie called him, and they had a great conversation. Pete suspected that Eva might have some awareness of what was happening, despite his protests. However, unless Eva told him directly, everything would catch him off guard. Pete thought about Joan, feeling frustrated with her. He didn't sleep well that night. On Tuesday morning, Pete worked from the hotel. At lunchtime, he received a notification from the GPS on Joan's car, indicating that it was leaving her office and heading home. Pete considered whether they would ride together, which seemed risky, so he assumed they would take separate paths. He noticed two cars pulling into his driveway through his home security cameras. He got ready to go home. He wasn't rushing because he figured they'd be a while. "People might start searching for us," Andrew said. "Don't worry," he continued. "I own the company. Nobody will question me." "True," she replied. "They won't question you, but they might wonder about me. I don't want anyone telling my husband." "Why don't you think he'll divorce you?" Andrew asked. This was another sign that Andrew only cared about sex, not her. "I don't know. I know he would not want to. He might overlook a one-time mistake, but what if he found out how long? I do not believe he would forgive me." Andrew said, "You have kept him in the dark for 3 years. I believe you can manage." "Yes, okay. Maybe I can, if we only meet each other every month or so, as we used to. The last few weeks have been risky. I'd like to keep it confidential so that only we know. That is why I should at least return to the office." Andrew smiled, thinking Ricky might find out and get involved soon. Joan was a good worker, but not essential. Her future at the company might depend on how she acts in the future. He believed he had her in a good spot. She couldn't cause trouble at work because it would reach her husband. She couldn't accuse him of harassment either, as proving it would be tough. He felt powerful and in control of the situation. He parked down the street, out of sight of the house, and listened to their conversations and lovemaking through Wi-Fi cameras. He heard the comment about 3 years ago and thought himself a fool. Instead of getting depressed, he used that as motivation for his anger. He checked his home security system on his phone app to ensure that no alarms were set and that no chimes would sound when he opened the back door. He sneaked in and quietly climbed the stairs. Once on the landing, he heard Joan pleading, "Come on, Andrew, I need to get back to the office." Pete walked into their bedroom and said, "That means get the hell out." Joan was shocked to see her husband standing there. She pulled the covers over herself and shouted, "Peter, I thought you were in Savannah. This is not what it seems." Pete leaned against the door frame and replied, "Now, Joan, you are usually a very smart woman, but that has to be the silliest thing you have ever said." Except for that idiot, he could see his wife's face and neck turned bright red at that remark. "Good," he said. "At least you feel some shame." Andrew stated, "Oh well." The little man decided to come and see how a real man takes care of his wife. "Don't worry," she claimed, "she only loves you, but we both know she enjoys being with me." And Andrew, "Shut up. That's not true, Pete," she sobbed. Pete said, "I only love you. Apparently not enough to stay away from this big jerk." He mentioned something to Andrew. "Well, I recall seeing your clueless toddler on the ground the other day, struggling to stand up after I knocked him down with my hands. Maybe I should go teach him another lesson for causing trouble. This 304, or would you like to take your best shot at me nonetheless?" "Your best shot at me was well deserved." That comment stung Joan. Pete had never mentioned anything about her. The other sentence certainly caught Andrew's attention. "I am going to beat you to death in your own home in front of your tiny wife. She wants a bigger and better man than you, and she got one. Go put on some shorts or pants and meet me in the backyard. I don't want to see your rear when the ambulance comes to pick you up," Pete said. Andrew went to get his pants as Pete laughed at him. "Joan, you traded me for that little carrot," Pete joked. "You could have said you wanted a taller man, but size didn't matter to you." Andrew was slightly bigger, but no man likes being mocked about his size. Pete wanted to upset Andrew. He left the room without waiting for a response. Joan was crying even more now, seeing Andrew follow Pete. She had to intervene to prevent any harm to her husband. She lunged at Andrew, but only managed to scratch the top of his shoulders and back with her nails. Startled by her actions, Andrew instinctively spun around and slapped her hard, sending her crashing against the headboard of the bed, injuring her and dazing her and dicing her to the point of near unconsciousness. Pete was quickly running down the stairs, and Andrew was fortunate not to hear the sound of Joan being struck. He didn't want his home damaged during the forthcoming conflict, because Pete was not planning on resolving the situation quickly or leaving his property. Then he sprinted into his backyard as though someone was chasing him, directly in view of his new security camera aimed at his backyard. Andrew was close behind him. Andrew declared, "I'm going to enjoy beating you, Pete. After I'm done, I'm going to bring Joan here and force her onto one of the pool chairs so you can watch," Pete responded through the mouthpiece. "I don't care if you force her or not. She's irrelevant to me now. What I'm doing here is teaching you how not to mistreat married women. I expect you to learn a harsh lesson in this backyard." Andrew sneered and approached Pete, planning to simply seize him and thrash him. He counted on his longer reach to be an advantage in the fight. Indeed, Andrew displayed slightly more skill than Ricky, holding his hands up in a classic boxing stance, shirtless. Pete noticed Andrew's large arms and shoulders, clearly a result of working out, though the flab around his waist suggested he focused more on weightlifting than cardio. Apart from his activities with Joan, Pete would benefit in a prolonged fight, and it was noted that his midsection might be vulnerable. As long as Pete kept his large, powerful fists from getting too close, he should manage well with the security system recording. Pete raised his hands as if he was unwilling to fight when he struck Andrew. He aimed to make it look like self-defense. He only wanted to use the footage if Andrew lied or tried to accuse him. He hoped nobody would ever see it. Andrew attacked Pete, throwing punches and trying to grab him, but Pete moved out of the way each time. After a while, Andrew got aggressive again. Pete was waiting for his chance. Andrew would come at him, and Pete would dodge or block, keeping his arms away from the camera. Pete was trying to avoid getting hit by the bigger guy. He could keep this up for a while, but he noticed Andrew was getting tired after a few minutes. Andrew's massive right-handed swing came as expected. It was identical to Ricky's butt from a superior opponent. Like he had done with Ricky, Pete hit Andrew hard in the right kidney when Andrew doubled over in pain. Andrew didn't fall, but that wasn't an issue for Pete since Andrew wasn't recovering quickly. Pete leaped and slammed down a fierce elbow onto the kidney area with a loud thud. Pete hoped the 12th rib was now completely detached after the blow. Collapsed. This time onto his hands and knees, he didn't attempt to get up as his side was in agony. How had that little guy hit him so hard? Pete stood waiting for Andrew to stand as this was being recorded. He needed Andrew to keep looking like the aggressor, but this was becoming increasingly difficult. Andrew eventually stood and raised his hands as if ready to box again, but Pete could tell he wasn't moving well. Pete was now enjoying Andrew throwing punches. Although his ribs ached, the jabs weren't particularly forceful. They almost looked for show. He understood that each punch would be painful, especially for someone who was not accustomed to being hit or in distress. Pete could now counter jabs as Andrew moved more sluggishly, but each jab targeted the side that had been struck before or the kidney area on the opposite side. Andrew's grimaces evolved into torment as each blow was landed. Andrew acknowledged he wasn't going to win the fight. He thought he could get close enough to the smaller man to attack him and throw him to the ground, since he realized he wasn't quick enough to strike the nimbleman. Also, his side was in severe pain and he was struggling to breathe. After calming down, Joan quickly put on a robe and rushed downstairs. She grabbed her phone and called 911, reporting that her husband and boss were fighting in the backyard and needed an ambulance. She paused as she reached her husband's home office and went inside. Andrew tried to attack Pete again, but this time he was slow and off balance. Pete tripped him, and when Andrew fell on his hands and knees, Pete pretended to kick him hard. He delivered the blow he had hoped for. Andrew screamed and curled up, unable to get up. Pete taunted Andrew, asking who was the tough guy now. "Compared to you, I'm a damn Kodiak. You're lucky I won't drag your rear into the water and drown you." Pete sat down about 10 feet away, listening to Andrew whimper and moan in pain. Normally, he would have been horrified to see somebody so terribly injured. He felt nothing for this man, except that a small amount of justice had been done. He waited for the police or ambulance to arrive, hoping Joan had contacted them. He was astonished he hadn't noticed her. Where was she? What happens next? Pete was stunned. Joan was running out of the house with a shotgun in her hands and a black eye indicating that she was approaching Andrew and aiming the gun, prompting Pete to jump up and calm the frantic woman. She yelled, "You won't hurt my husband. I will kill you, do you hear me? You won't hurt my hubby, there's little chance of that happening." Pete embraced her, bringing the gun to point down to the ground, and he gently slipped the gun out of her hands and placed it on the ground away from them. Several minutes later, a police officer arrived and approached them. She was still saying, "You will not hurt my husband. You won't hurt my hubby." She seemed to be unraveling. The officer removed the shotgun shells before examining the injured man. Speaking with dispatch, he learned that the ambulance was only a few minutes away. Andrew was coughing up blood by this point. The officer was surprised because Andrew's only visible injuries were his red sides. He had some early bruising and scratches on his upper back. The officer noticed Joan's black eye and asked if she was okay. This silenced her complaints and seemed to wake her up. She replied that Andrew attacked her when her husband arrived, and Andrew chased him. Pete was confused by her response. The officer said it was an unprovoked assault and asked Joan to go to the hospital to document it. Joan asked if her husband could take her, and the officer agreed but urged them to go as soon as possible, preferably right away. "I'll stay here with the attacker until the ambulance arrives." He examined Pete and commented, "You appear unharmed. Let me guess, you are tough or something." Pete shook his head and replied, "Or something. I know how to defend myself and my family, but I can assure you that I am far more dangerous than you can imagine." The officer nodded, and Joan sobbed on her husband's shoulder, knowing Andrew hadn't injured him. She was the one who had hurt him. He took Joan inside to get dressed for the hospital. She asked if he'd come with her to help her change, but he said no. He didn't want to accompany her upstairs because he didn't want to see the room where she had been with her lover. Joan looked as though she had aged a decade as she descended the steps. The ambulance had already arrived, and as they passed by the officer, Pete inquired if it was possible to have the car towed. He expressed his desire not to have it around when they returned. Joan did not need to be reminded of it. It wasn't that he cared deeply about Joan, he just wanted it removed. The officer replied that he would handle it. In the car, they drove in silence almost halfway to the hospital. Then Joan implored, "Talk to me, Pete, yell at me, scream at me, call me names again, but tell me what's on your mind." He drove on for another minute before blurting out, "How are you planning to handle the assault charge? Everyone will realize it was consensual. I won't lie for you." Jones looked serious. "I see this as a chance to separate from him. He's getting too controlling, and I've already decided to leave him and his company," she said. She glanced at her husband, feeling incredulous. "Just because I'm not tall doesn't mean I lack intelligence," she muttered. "I understand," he replied. "I'd ask why you did it, but I already know." "I'm sorry," she whispered. Sadly, she would do almost anything for him, but one thing she couldn't change was what he held against her for years. "You shouldn't have married me. Please don't bring up the mistake I made," Joan pleaded. Despite their good life together, with a wonderful family, a lovely home, and fulfilling jobs, there was one thing she couldn't change: her preference for taller, larger men. "That's a keen observation," he remarked. "You should have considered all those good things and realized an affair wasn't worth the risk. As a portfolio manager, you know about risks," he noted. "I know I was foolish. Can you forgive me?" Pete shook his head. Maybe someday, but not soon, he replied. She then asked if there was a possibility they might stay together. No, that's not possible, he retorted. But why, she protested. Why do you think he scoffed? Because of the affair. Could try therapy, we might overcome this, Joan suggested. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Last Friday, his young son sent me a link to a cloud account where the things you and Andrew did last week were recorded, he said. She gasped in shock. I don't know who set it up, Andrew or Ricky, but I heard everything. You no longer need to worry about wearing high heels for my sake, he said. Though it had never bothered him before, he knew it troubled her. You won't have to worry about others seeing your shorter husband as an easy target, he added. Do you still deny making up the story about Paris? Joan barely shook her head, but it was clear she was guilty. Also, when Ricky sent the link, he mentioned that Andrew had promised to find a way to trick you. No wonder he acted like he owned our backyard. He showed no respect for me or for us. Why would he do that? His dad acted the same way. And who started disrespecting our marriage first? That was you, Joan, he reminded her. Realizing she had been the one to disrespect Pete first, Joan was also surprised that Ricky thought he could get close to her. She didn't like Ricky, and now she understood why he had been so persistent. She couldn't believe how far things had gone. Pete, I don't know what else to say except I'm really sorry, she said. You might be sorry, but it's not enough. You've lost my trust and respect, he said firmly, even though he was a much better person than the other guy in every way. She asked what plans I now had to send you divorce documents today. I'll hold off a bit longer on those depending on how the next few days unfold. We're still separating, but giving you the documents on the day you were reportedly attacked would certainly appear unfavorable in family court. He questioned, so how do you plan to stage the assault? Why did you ask if you intend to send an innocent man to prison? I intended to send him to the undertaker, but since you were as guilty as he is, that remark made her contemplate jumping from the moving vehicle. Jones stated that there was nothing blameless about him. All you need to tell the police is that I was sobbing. When you walked into the bedroom, you saw nothing else. Once Andrew noticed you, he attacked you. I will handle the rest so you won't need to lie, which is untrue, he claimed. I know, but I implored him to leave. The tears would have followed soon after. Pete commented, I have this black eye as proof he struck me and skin from his back under my nails to show I defended myself. And don't overlook the internal evidence that he violated you. Oops, I meant to say attacked you. Joan broke down in tears upon hearing this. Pete inquired. She regained her composure and continued, you still haven't explained why you grabbed the shotgun. Crazy things can occur during disputes. I wasn't about to let him hurt you. I had no clue how long I had been out, so I seized it, not knowing what to. Was this what you expected to see? They both understood the response to that question. Pete appreciated her effort to protect him, but she should have felt that way 3 years ago and avoided starting the affair. A few minutes later, still in the car, Pete called Brian. Brian, it's Pete. Joan and I are going to the hospital. We're both okay, but we need a good lawyer quickly. I'll give you all the details as soon as I can, probably later today. Man, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll make some calls. Are you going to Williamson's Medical Center? Yeah, we are, Brian. Got it. That's good. I'm glad you're keeping it in the family. Sorry, that was a bad attempt at a joke. I'll make sure someone meets you there soon. And don't talk to anyone until you've spoken to your lawyer. We understand. Thanks, Brian. Pete hung up and looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife. You understood that, right? This is a dangerous game you're playing, and you need to clear your name before you get tangled in lies and end up in jail on top of the adultery. I'm certain your children and relatives would prefer to see you outside of jail internally. Jones sighed at her situation. Perhaps she should leap from the car after all. As Brian recounted, they were greeted in the emergency room by the hospital administrator and chief legal counsel. They knew Brian personally, and the lawyer was a distant family member. They were mainly there to ensure they were attended to immediately, and that nobody tried to question them until they had spoken with the lawyer. When Cindy, the lawyer, arrived, she quickly understood Joan's plan. They slowly went over what happened, including the length of the affair and some details. Ricky joined and got involved, using footage from Andrew's apartment and the clerk's security system. Joan felt embarrassed having to explain everything in front of her husband. Pete wasn't angry anymore, he just felt numb. Who was the person he had been living with? Finally, the lawyer advised Joan to seek an out-of-court settlement that would compensate her enough to transition to another firm. She thought the district attorney's office might pursue a criminal case due to the affair's duration, which could seem like sour grapes, possibly bad, but that was the most likely outcome. Also, Andrew's version of the story could support a defense, making it hard for 12 jurors to convict him. So why would the Dow waste the court's time, which would probably lead to a hung jury? However, Andrew would likely prefer that his name and firm stay out of civil court and, more importantly, the press. He would also likely prefer that no mention be made of the assault he endured while visiting a married woman's residence. At this moment, Pete asked for a few minutes with Joan. He declared, "I don't mind if the settlement is for $10,000 or $10 million in the divorce papers. I aim to claim the house. All other assets will be divided 50/50, except for my consulting business. And there will be no spousal support. So you may want to try to secure as much as possible." "Wait, I want to change it. You can keep the bed." After hearing that response, Joan felt like she would have to deal with that awful man on her own. She was afraid her husband would leave her. She knew it was her fault, but facing this alone was almost unbearable. She said, "Are you willing to fight me for the house?" He replied. "After everything I've found out recently, after what I've seen on video these past few days, after what I saw in her bedroom today, and after what I did to your lover just now, you should think about what I might do. Consider what I could do with those videos and who I could show them to. Your laptop is still on our home network, so I have the contact details for all of your clients and several of the firm's others. I could show them a wonderful video of their investment advisor, not taking oaths seriously or displaying good judgment. How many of them do you think would continue our partnership? But how about you? Ask your lover how furious I am and what I'm prepared to do. Trust me, he got off easily. If the only thing I obtained from the marriage you destroyed is our house, you'll have gotten off easily every time he uttered the word lover." It felt like a searing iron on her skin. It hurt her, but what could she argue? There were no extenuating circumstances. "I'm not willing to dispute with Pete over the terrible mess she created." She conceded to him and decided to take as much as she could from the scoundrel who wrecked her marriage. Following Andrew's operations, Joan received a settlement from him. It took many weeks to finalize and a few more weeks to receive, but it was sufficient that even if it took her years to find work and return to her former income, she would manage to survive. Not long afterwards, she landed a new job at a massive global corporation, so she had at least some prospects. She purchased a condo close to her new job and set up a 3-bedroom home so the children could stay over occasionally. She hoped as much. She disposed of her old bedroom furniture as she didn't want it either. She tried to leave her past errors behind, but the nights were the hardest. She alternated between feeling numb and experiencing intense sorrow. She called Pete several times, crying, and then hung up without saying anything. She felt like she needed to see a psychiatrist and get comfort from her children and a few of her brothers who lived nearby. One thing that helped her with her new company was that she convinced some of her old clients to leave Andrew's firm. It was easy because they loved her and were ready to leave anyway after someone suggested a reporter investigate a police report involving Andrew at a married woman's house through Freedom of Information Act requests. The report was detailed, including the husband who was assaulted but cleared of any wrongdoing, and the wife who claimed assault and wielded a shotgun to protect her husband. The story made headlines and even made it to the local news. When Andrew was released from the hospital, his only response to inquiries was, "It's a personal issue, no comments." He underwent many treatments that saved his damaged kidney, healed his rib, and partially restored function to his testicle. There was hope that he might be able to get an erection eventually, but he would need more surgery, which would be tough. For Pete, the past few weeks had been the longest of his life. He tried to keep driving as much as he could. The months that came after, including Thanksgiving, were just as hard. He felt really sick the day Joan left. It felt even worse than when his grandparents passed away. Eva was kind of prepared for what Ricky told her. He had planted a seed of doubt that later turned into the truth she hated. She hated what her mother did. How could anyone hurt her father like that, especially when he did nothing wrong? She knew this would upset him for a while. Her mother would be okay. Eva figured she would find a way to explain what she did. Maybe this would make her realize what she did wrong. She would still take care of her mother and try to forgive her. She knew it would take a long time for their relationship to get better. Eva talked to Donnie beforehand so he wouldn't be too surprised. He was mad at his mom. Since he was in his last semester at Georgia Tech, he could ignore what was going on and ignore his mom's calls. Even though he got the house and the divorce settled, the whole situation was awful and didn't help the kids' education. With the kids gone, Pete wondered if he should just sell the house. The three sisters tried to cheer him up. Thanks for watching, guys.